And we are back. So here's what we're going to do. We need to set up a couple of things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to take my files from last week. I'm going to copy all of those files into a Lesson 6 folder. Okay. So if you were here last week, you can use your files. If you weren't here, you can grab them off Blackboard if you like. So I've got everything here. Actually, what do we do? So I'm just going to take those 4 files from last week. Athlete, save, athletes, and delete. And I'll just copy them into a Lesson 6 folder for today. Thank you. So it's these 4 files. Save athlete, athlete, athletes plural, and delete. I think those are the only files in we had last week, was those 4. Remember, if you take them off Blackboard, you will need to put your login into those because they don't have a credential. Right? So what I'm going to do, I actually just need to put my password into each of these files. And I'm going to upload them to the Lesson 6 folder. We'll just get them running online, so we'll have an exact copy of the files, and we'll make sure all of these pages are working. So I'm going to connect to FileZilla. I'm going to upload a copy of the files into the Lesson 6 folder and just make sure that they all work in the browser the same way they did last week. So once I have them all up on the server, I should be able to load the same pages, but now from my Lesson 6 folder. So I can add, edit. So we'll keep the Lesson 5 version as a public site, and we'll work on turning today's into a private one. If you're not already connected to your database on DreamHost, please get connected so you can either go to sql.computerstudies in your browser and log in, or open up MySQL Workbench and connect. Please do that. We need to run a quick script. We need to build a table to store logins. Right? If we're going to validate who our users are, we need to have a place that our database can hold a list of users. So if you're using the browser and you're just going to SQL.Computer Studies, once you log in, just click on your database name and then click the SQL tab, and I've given you a quick script that will build a users table. The script is on Blackboard, that we need is on Blackboard inside of lesson 6. It says user table script right here. I've highlighted it in blue. Just copy that. It's going to create a user table with 3 columns. A user ID, which will be automatically generated by the database, a 50-character username, and a 128-character password field. Now, we need to talk about this, the password. So, actually, I already have a users table. I'm going to drop it, and I'll recreate it. So when we run it, it should tell you your query executes, and you should get a new empty table called users being built.
Why is password tar instead of varchar?
And why is it 128?
Great questions. We're coming to that. You guys read my mind. Are we really going to ask for 128 character passwords?
No.
No, so why would we want, first of all, we want so many characters in the database, and second of all, what's the difference between char and varchar? How are they different? They both store alphanumeric data.
What's the difference upon when the value is given? Like, you will only take what's known.
Okay, so varchar stands for variable length characters, right? We may have different length passwords, different length usernames, so we'll use variable characters. The password, we could use varchar, but our passwords are actually always going to be 128 characters in PHP. Close. We're not going to encrypt them. We're going to do something similar. We're going to hash them. Okay, hashing and encryption are similar, but there's a very important difference you'll want to write down, because I'm going to ask you this next week. What's the difference between hashing and encryption? I'll give you a hint. Hashing is considered more secure. That's why we're going to use hashing for the passwords instead of encryption.
Hashing you can't reverse.
You got it. Hashing is one way. Okay? Encryption is two-way. So we can take plain text, we can take the word test, and we can turn it into a long string of random letters and numbers. But if we can encrypt it into a long string, anything we can encrypt, we can also decrypt. We can convert back into the plain text version. Hashing, there is no way to convert plain from the hashed version back. Think about when you lose a password on a website. What do you have to do if you lose your password? You have to reset it, right? Any site that lets you see your old password, they're encrypting it, because they can then decrypt it and show you the original password, right? If they make you reset it, that's a clue. They must be hashing it, so they have no way to show you the old password. So this comes to why we're using 128 characters. There are different algorithms for hashing in PHP. They keep adding new ones that are stronger, as older ones tend to become weaker and get hacked over time. The algorithm we're going to use for hashing will always produce 128 characters. Okay, I'm going to show you how it works. I'll build a quick sample page. You can copy this page if you want, but you don't have to. I'm just going to show you how it works quickly. Okay. I'll open up my hash file. Bear with me for a second. So I'll show you how the function we want to use works. Okay, so I've got a form here with just a regular text box. I'll load it in the browser. So here's my form. I just have a regular text box. What I'm going to do is put in some text, send it to the server, to this page called hash.php. So here's what hash.php is going to do. It's going to read the value and stick it in a variable. Pretty simple. I'm going to print out just whatever text was entered in the box. And then I'm going to hash it using this algorithm. So PHP has a built-in function called hash. And when I call that function, the parameters are what hashing algorithm do we want to use. So SHA-512 is now considered the standard for PHP. You've probably heard of some other hashing algorithm. I think you mentioned one earlier.
MD5.
MD5 is one. Does anybody know any other ones?
SHA-1.
There's SHA-1. So SHA-1 creates a 40-character string. SHA-512 creates how many characters? 128. So we'll look at what it does. Okay, so when I run this and post my form, so there's my plain text value. When I pass it through the SHA-512 algorithm with PHP hash, that's what it gives me. If I throw that into a Word document and do the word count, I think it's in here, right? Exactly 128 characters. It doesn't matter how much text I put in this box. Right? I've gone way beyond 128 characters. But when I hash that, so there's my plain text, that's still exactly 128 characters if I throw it into Word. Okay? So it's not, it doesn't do a character per character conversion. So this is why there's no way to convert this back into this. It's one way only, so it's more secure. Okay? I guarantee you someone in this class is going to do it. It happens every time. Somebody is going to do their assignment and say, because for part 2 of your assignment 2, part of it's going to be that most of the site is private. You're going to have to register and log in. And somebody's going to say, I can't log in. I don't know why. I'm sure I'm putting in the right username. I'm sure I'm putting in the right password. And it keeps saying invalid login. And whenever this happens, I say, look in your database in the users table. How many characters did you allow for the password? And usually people put in 50. So when you store the registration, you're only storing the first 50 characters of the password. And then you're logging in with the whole 128, so the passwords don't match and you can never log in. So we have to make sure when we're using SHA-512, 128 characters every time. So we could use varchar, but there's no need because it's always going to be exactly that number of characters. It's not wrong to use varchar, but typically if we know we're going to have a set number, we'll specify it as char. So that way it won't allow any other length values. Okay. So does everybody have their users table built in their database? Okay, so the next thing we need to build is a registration page so we can add users. We don't want to just insert users here because we need to put the passwords through the hashing mechanism so we get 128 character password and then save the user. Okay. To save a bit of time, I'm just going to upload, here, I'll make this really simple for you. I'm going to just put the HTML on Blackboard for you. And you can just copy it. Whoops. I've left Bootstrap out for now. If we have time to add it later, we will. So just refresh your Lesson 6 folder. And you can copy. So copy register.php, save it to your Lesson 6 folder. Give it that name, register.php. It's just a simple form with a username box and 2 password boxes. And I suppose in the header, actually, I'll edit it. May as well put the Bootstrap links in. So steal my form. So I'm just going to copy the Bootstrap links as well from one of my other pages. I'll dump those in the header. And I'm going to just apply a couple of classes. I'll give my form a class of form horizontal. And I'll give my submit button down here on line 30 a class. It's probably easier if I dim the lights a bit here in the front, eh? Is that easier to see?
Yeah.
Give that a class of BTN, BTN primary. So I'll just add those two classes for now. And then upload register.php to your lesson 6 folder. And then we're going to need to build save registration, where we hash the password, make sure their passwords match, hash the password, and insert them to the users table. Okay, what's up?
I don't know, I'm getting a weird error.
Okay, I'll come have a look in a second. So our form should look, if we now load our register page, I'll put the code back up for you in just a second. So it should look like this. I'll maybe add one or two other things on here. I'm going to add a div just at the top that says class equals container. And I'll move that div down to the very bottom so the whole thing lives inside of this container. And I'll put on a heading that says user registration. Just make sure that looks okay, and I'll put the code back up for you. Okay, so there's our page.
Maybe because it looks like you're hosting local host and you're running that on the server.
Thanks.
Okay, so upload your page. So it doesn't really matter what your form looks like as long as you've got a form with a username box, password, confirm, and a submit button. That's all you really need. If you don't have all the classes and formatting, no problem. Does anybody still need this code? Should I leave it up for a couple more minutes? People still working with it? Okay. Just kind of give me a wave or a nod when we're good to go on. If your page is already loading, you can make a new PHP page and save it with this name. Call it save registration.php. So that's the page we're going to build next. That will basically be an invisible page. We're just going to process the registration form, save the user. You having an error? Do you have an error?
the
We will do that. We're going to do one thing first.
hash the password.
Sorry, two things first. Hash the password is one, so we'll connect. What should we do before that?
Input validation.
Right. So we're going to make sure that none of the fields are empty. What else do we need to check? Here's our form. What else should we check?
Oh, that confirm password equal password.
Right, let's make sure that we didn't get two different passwords. Okay, so we'll check that each field is not empty and that the passwords match. If they do, then we'll hash the password, we'll connect, insert, disconnect. We can just show a message. Or give a login link. We could say your registration successful, click here to log in. And we'll take them off to the login page, which is what we'll build next. So almost all of this code you can do on your own. The only thing we haven't done here is this. Everything else you've done in class, you've done it in the lab, you've done it in the assignment. All right, so we'll use the post collection. So our inputs are called username, password, and confirm. They're all lowercase. And I'll use an OK variable like we did 2 weeks ago. We'll default it to true. And then if we find any problems in our next section, we'll toggle that flag from true to false, so we know not to save the user. So we'll check the username if it's empty. And if username's empty, we'll change OK. It was true, it's now false. We'll do the same thing for password. And then we'll check if the password variable and the confirm variable are not equal. We'll want to show the user a message in that case as well. So we'll need 3 checks for validation. So our third check will say if password does not equal confirm,
Is there a reason why we're not using die instead of echo?
No, you could use die if you wanted to. Although I'm not sure if we use die, whether this is going to continue to run. Because, well, then that's a good reason to use echo, because if we use die here, we still want these conditions. We want to print all of the error messages out. We don't just want our script to stop. So we want to give the user all of the error messages. So we want it to keep going, right? Because otherwise, if they leave it blank, they're just going to get usernames required. Then they'll put in username, hit submit again. Then they're going to get passwords required. We may as well show them everything at once. Otherwise, we've made them fill it out again. So there's nothing new here. This is exactly what we did 2 weeks ago. And now we can evaluate our variable called OK. Right? We only want to do this stuff if OK is still true. Otherwise, we don't have to do anything else. We've already printed the error messages to the screen. We could just stop. So if OK, I'm going to indent all of those other comments. And don't forget, you need to close the curly bracket here at the bottom, okay? Or else you're going to get an unexpected end error if we open a curly bracket on line 33 and never close it. So we're going to hash the password, connect to our database, insert the values, bind the parameters, and insert, disconnect, and give the user a message. So all I'm going to do is take my password variable. I could create a new variable to store the hash, but we really don't need to. So we'll call the hash function, and we want to use SHA-512 as the algorithm. So we're taking the existing password, hashing the value, and we're changing the value of our password variable. So before this line runs, password is in plain text. After this line executes, our password value now holds the 128 character hash value. If you prefer to have a separate variable here that you call hash, that's fine. One word of warning, somebody does this every time. Every time. If you put quotes in here, you are hashing the word $password. So there's no quotes around this. This is a variable. Okay? We want to make sure we don't include quotes around that. So hashing's pretty simple, just that one little function. The rest of the code, pretty much you can do on your own. Connect, create a command, write the SQL string, add the username and password parameters. We'll make sure password is 128 characters. And we'll execute the command and disconnect. Now we only need to insert the password once. We had 2 password fields on the form, but that was just to make sure that the user put in the same password 2 times. We don't need to store the password and a confirm password. We only need to store it once. So we'll set up a parameter for username and a parameter for password. And we'll prepare a command, then we'll fill the 2 parameters and execute our insert. Okay, so we're not doing anything new here. how many characters does the password parameter need? Needs to be 128, right? If we put in 50, we're only going to be saving the first 50 characters of the hash, and that user's never ever going to be able to log into our site. So we need 128 characters for the password. And then we'll execute that command. So after this line runs, we should have a new user account, and the database will automatically generate a new user ID for that person. So then we'll give them a link to login.php, which we'll build in a minute. So we'll print out a confirmation and give them a link they can click, so then they can log in. Sure.
Where you use the if statements.
So the first thing I want to do is try this out and try my validation to make sure that I can't leave the form blank or put in two different passwords. We want to make sure that our validation rules are working. So if I leave my form blank, tells me they're both required. If I put in two different passwords, again, it tells me my passwords don't match. So please pay attention to this, okay? We're going to come back and potentially use this page in the future, so I want everybody to create the same user account. We're going to use a very, very sophisticated login system. Here's what we're going to do once you get your form loaded. In the username, use test, password, test, confirm password, test. We're all going to create a user with this exact same name. So if we use this in a few weeks down the road after our midterm and after reading week, no one's going to say, oh crap, I don't remember what login I created in week 6. If you say I don't forget the login, the rest of the class, we can all yell at you, the login is test and test. Okay, we're all creating a user with that credential in our database. Okay. So I'll try to register with that credential. Tells me I was saved, and now I can check in my database. So here's my user with username test, and all of you should have the same password, right? It will hash the same value the same way each time. So your password will start with the characters EE26 when it's hashed. So once now it's fine if you want to make other user accounts and register other users as well, that's fine. But at least everybody should have one that says test and test. Okay, and that way we all know the login, that we won't forget. Oops. Okay. So if I click to log in, I'm going to get a 404 not found because we haven't built the login page yet. We'll do that next. But I can scroll up or down in this code, whatever somebody needs to see. Do you need to see the top, the bottom? Just let me know what to show if you're still working on your save page. Yeah, what do you need to see? Make a new file in your code editor. Delete everything here. Okay, so delete, highlight, delete it all, so you've got a blank page. And then just paste in all that code from Blackboard, and we need to change about 3 things. I'm going to save this as login.php. I'm going to change the title to say login. Okay. No, I didn't want to because I don't have those files locally. It's okay. I'll just delete it. I'll paste it in again. Okay. So I'm going to change my title to login. I'm going to change my H1 tag on line 17 from user registration to login. I'm going to change the action, the page that's going to process our login. We'll just call it validate.php. That will be the page that checks the database for the username and password. Okay, so all I've done is change the title, I've changed the action. I'm going to take out this div that I've highlighted in green. We don't need a confirm box. They only have to give us the password once. So we'll take that whole div out, just delete it. And I'll just change the value property of my button to say login. My button had a value equals register. We want it to say value equals login. That should be it. So I will upload my login file. And now we should be able to go to login.php. We get a simple login page. Without a checkbox, we're not giving you a cookie, we're not letting you stay logged into our site because it's just not secure. You got to log in every time. So make sure you can load your login page in the browser. Sakib will be right there. So what we're going to do, okay, we're going to take a pause here for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 3:05. So we have two more things we need to do today. We need to build the validate page where we're checking the username and password and deciding. We need to do this. Do we have a valid username and password? Yes or no? And if we do, we're going to need to store the user's identity, and then we'll want to let them load the athletes page. Then on our athletes page, we're going to need a check at the top because this page is still public, right? So we're going to need a security check at the top. Do we know who this person is? Yes or no? If we know who they are, let them in. If we don't know who they are, kick them back to the login screen and make them identify themselves first. Okay? We should be able to get all of that working. The validate page and then the script that will run on the top of this page. We'll get all that working before we get out today. And then hopefully we'll even have time to put that script on here as well. So they can't add, edit, delete. They can't do anything if they're not logged in. Okay? So I'll leave the code up. We'll take 10 minutes. We'll come back at 3:05.